roll. You got me rocking and a rolling, rocking and a reeling, Barbara Ann, Barbara Ann.
The Beach Boys are one of the most commercially successful, critically acclaimed and most influential bands ever.
The Beach Boys are America's reflection on itself.
They invented surf rock, but their influence and their music is much more important than that mere genre. The Beach Boys came from Hawthorne, which was a grimy industrial suburb of Los Angeles, as far away from the beaches and the sun and the romance of Southern California as you can possibly imagine.
Dennis, Carl and Brian were brothers. Their cousin, Mike Love, was in the band too, and their high school friend, Al Jardine, made up the band. So they're essentially a family band.
Brian was pretty fascinated with music from a very young age. He was particularly interested in harmonies and those bands that were around at the time that were doing those kind of close harmonies. It was something that he took upon himself to teach to his brothers and his cousin so they could then perform at family dues.
Brian's first idea was to teach the harmonies that the Wilson brothers were learning to Mike Love's sister. Mike Love, he was having none of that, and he insisted that Brian and the brothers teach him the harmonies, and they formed some sort of loose group together.
The group's original name was the Pendletons, an homage to the Pendleton woolen mill shirts that were fashionable at the time.
Dennis Wilson was actually the only member of the Beach Boys who had any background in surfing. He'd really got into this new craze that had hit California. And he came home and said, you know what, guys, we should write some music for this. There should be some songs that reflect this amazing new sport that everyone's getting into.
If everybody had an ocean across the USA, then everybody'd be surfing like California.
The key figure in the Wilsons' upbringing was their father, Murray. Murray had a day job as a factory foreman, but he was also a songwriter.
He was a songwriter of some note. I don't think he was frustrated, really. And so when the boys formed the band, he jumped on board from day one and insisted on being their manager.
He was their publisher. He was their booker. He did everything.
It's never a good idea for parents to live through their children, especially not when you're living through them and trying to control them at the same time, which is what Murray Wilson tried to do.
He was an incredibly domineering figure. As Brian acknowledged, without the discipline that Murray imposed, the Beach Boys would not have got off the ground.
Murray introduced the boys to his publisher, Height Morgan. Height passed on their demo to Herb Newman, who signed them up to Candix Records in December 1961.
The Beach Boys' name came about without the group actually choosing it themselves. It was Candix Records who renamed them. The band only found out when they opened up the boxes with their first records in and saw that was their name.
The very, very early days of the Beach Boys was about harmony singing. I think the Four Freshmen would be the key influence.
Brian's influences were very much doo-wop, a little bit of gospel, and a little bit of very early, basic rock and roll. But what really moved him, more than anything, were the great harmony groups. Brian was deaf in one ear, allegedly after being assaulted by his father. This meant that a man who would become one of the great stereo innovators of popular music for the next few decades couldn't actually hear in stereo. So all the music that he heard, he internalized and he invented stereo for himself in his own head. And I think that's part of the reason why he didn't make music like anyone else had made before.
He had the ability to create pop songs, but do unusual things in them. You know, there'd be unusual time signatures, some tempo changes, and unusual intervals.
In 1962, Al Jardine left the band to attend college and was replaced by the Beach Boys' neighbour, David Marks.
Well, David Marks's role in the Beach Boys has often been very underplayed, but he was a significant player on the first 4 Beach Boys albums. He brought a sense of rock and roll to the Beach Boys, which they wouldn't otherwise have had.
Surfing is the only life, the only way for me now. Surf.
Surfing was the debut single from the Beach Boys, and it aired heavily on 2 of the most influential teen stations in California, KFWB and KRLA.
Surfing was a hit in the Californian charts. It got to number 3 and it sold a few 100,000 copies.
That kind of idea of what we think of as that surfing sound, it all started with that song.
Let's go surfing now, everybody's learning how. Come on a safari with me. Come on a safari with me.
The success of their debut single brought the Beach Boys to the attention of Capitol Records, and they signed a 7-year deal with Capitol in 1962 and went on to release their second single and their album, both of which were called Surfing Safari.
Surfing Safari was a national hit. It was the archetypal, innocent California sound and image which was being sold to the rest of America. So all of a sudden it's girls and beaches and surfing. It was a very simple, optimistic, energetic style of music on that Beach Boys album.
They became the centre of that new surfing sound, but in fact this actually meant that they got kind of stuck in that genre, and that's all that people expected from them.
Across the USA, then everybody be surfing like California.
Surfing USA, their second album, was the moment where the Beach Boys crystallised their early sound. The reason it did that was because for the very first time, Brian understood how the Beach Boys should be recorded.
You can see Brian Wilson really becoming much more confident in himself as a songwriter and upping the level of what he's capable of. And this is also the first time that he uses double tracking in the recording process, which at the time was really innovative.
Everybody's got surfing, surfing USA.
They released 2 albums about a month apart. The first one was Surfer Girl, the second one was Little Deuce Coupe.
Little Deuce Coupe, you don't know what I got.
In 1963, the Beach Boys released 3 albums. Al Jardine had rejoined the group. The classic lineup had come together. And the Beach Boys suddenly were a national concern.
You don't know what I
The hits were just coming thick and fast at this point. Brian was producing, but producing of a certain formula.
In 1964, something very important happened culturally in America. This was the period that the Beatles had just come over. They'd had their famous appearance on the Ed Sullivan Show.
He couldn't understand why they were so popular and why Capitol Records suddenly seemed to be putting all their efforts into the Beatles rather than the Beach Boys. But Brian Wilson became an absolutely huge fan of the Beatles. And I think he saw them as the great rivals, but with a great respect too. You know, this was the band to match up to.
When the Beatles began to conquer America, they were furthering songwriting, and Brian saw himself as a songwriter rather than a performer. He also understood that continually writing about the surf culture of Southern California wasn't really worthy of his talents. He wanted to write about different concerns. He wanted to write about himself. So that alerted him to the possibility of taking the Beach Boys away from the beach.
Round, round, get around, I get around, yeah, get around, round, round, I get around, I get around, round, round, I get around, get around, round, round, I get around.
Listen to the opening few a cappella bars of that song. It's like music from another world. It's amazing. It's as if Brian was playing with this genre and saying, I know it's surf music, but look what I can do with it.
It sums up everything from that era, from all those surfing songs in one place. All Summer Long was the album, I think, that Brian Wilson wrote as a farewell to the first time of the Beach Boys, the surfing, the cars, the California sound that they'd been so famous for.
He had to sack his father It was a band vote, it wasn't just Brian. You know, Mike Love, everybody, I think, wanted to get rid of Murray Wilson.
Murray wanted cheap, quick hits, just as the record company did. And for Brian, this wasn't enough. He wanted something of more long-lasting artistic worth, which would have a wider resonance beyond the Beaches.
The very end of the year, Brian Wilson was on tour with the Beach Boys and he had a mid-air panic attack, very, very severe. And when the plane landed, he said, I cannot tour anymore.
So at that time, the Beach Boys, they didn't stop touring, they just got in different people to take Brian's place.
They had to replace him with consummate musicians, people who were capable of handling these intricate harmony vocals upon which the Beach Boys sound was based. So you had people like Glenn Campbell passing through, Bruce Johnston, who would be on and off Beach Boy for the rest of his career.
When Brian got to just concentrate on recording in the studio, the first album that came out of that was The Beach Boys Today. And it's that first move into seeing an album in sections, in different moods.
Capitol Records didn't like it at all, and you can see why. Because he was the most successful band in America, who didn't want to carry on being the most successful band in America. Or rather, Brian Wilson didn't. This was the beginning of a new era where the Beach Boys went on tour. And while they were away, Brian Wilson was making masterpieces. He got the Wrecking Crew, which is Phil Spector's musicians, all classically trained, all the best you could buy in California, working on these huge productions, which later became Pet Sounds and Good Vibrations.
Love you, but long as there are stars above you.
I think Pet Sounds is one of the best albums ever made. It dispenses with the blues and R&B structures that almost all pop and rock has been using up until then.
Ideas of using soundscapes, of multi-layering, of using really unusual instruments.
The arrangements are very unusual. Wouldn't It Be Nice? Sounds like a perky pop song. It's actually for pop music, a rare example of bitonality. In other words, it's in two keys at the same time. And it's got to change from A to F at the very beginning, which is really strange. There's a certain skill in writing catchy pop music, and there's a certain skill in making completely avant-garde experimental music, but it's extremely hard to do both at the same time. And that's why Pet Sounds is such a masterpiece.
It's fair to say that it changed the course of 20th century pop music.
Songs like God Only Knows and Sloop John B, you can see how those elements have been brought together to create what I think is Brian Wilson's masterpiece.
We come on the sloop John B, my grandfather and me, around Nassau town we did roam, drinking all night. Got into a fight. Well, I feel so broken, I wanna go home.
Brian's U-turn didn't go down well with the American public. They saw the Beach Boys as this surf band. Countries outside America, such as the United Kingdom, they never really grasped what surf culture was. So when the Beach Boys did become more introspective, there was a ready-made market for this kind of music.
It's her perfume through the air. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations. I'm picking up good vibrations. She's giving me the excitations.
Good Vibrations, wow. It's obviously a mini masterpiece, but it didn't come by accident. It took 8 months to record. It was recorded in several studios.
It's said to have cost $75,000, taking 8 months to produce. It's like the most expensive single ever recorded at that time.
As the Beach Boys and also the Beatles publicist Derek Taylor called it, it was a pocket symphony. In other words, it was a piece of music which had pieces of music within it.
It opened people's eyes to the genius, and that's not too cheap a word here, to the genius of Brian Wilson.
Brian Wilson brought the composer and lyricist Van Dyke Parks in when he was recording Smile, which of course is the album that was a year in the making but never got released. It was going to be this kind of amazing follow-up to Pet Sounds.
He added to the Smile project, which became the Smiley Smile album, interesting lyrics which matched Brian's vision.
It was a real concept album where each track would be linked thematically, experimented with things like cowboy songs, Hawaiian music, and when the other members of the band came to look at it, they realised with all these disparate fragments, he was the only person who could understand it.
On and on she go, dum-be-doo.
This is the era of the famous sandbox, when he'd put a sandbox in his room and put the grand piano in the middle of it so he could be a child again. And it was on the knife edge of great music, great experimentation and fragmentation, when he could not hold these ideas together and he couldn't hold his own mind together. So it became symbolic of a terrible period in his life because things fell apart.
I'm gonna be right.
By the late 60s, Brian's excessive use of drugs led to a nervous breakdown.
Love you most.
1967 was a pretty bad year for the Beach Boys. This is after Brian Wilson's had his nervous breakdown. He's not able to contribute to the band at all.
They left Capitol Records, suing them for $2 million with issues over the back catalogue, and they set up their own label, Brother, which ended up actually not coming into effect for 3 years. They also had to pull out of the Monterey Music Festival.
They didn't have any new material to play, so they pulled out.
And that was the point at which the Beach Boys lost the credibility that they should have had.
This is the way I always dreamed it would be. The way that it is, oh, when you are holding me, I never had.
The Beach Boys had been the most commercially successful American band of the 60s, and somehow, by the end of the decade, it turns out that they're virtually penniless.
At this time as well, Murray Wilson actually sold their Sea of Tunes back catalogue.
And this devastated Brian. I don't think it was the money. It was the thought that all of this work had been taken out of his hands and by his own father had been sold off to a third party.
The band reactivated their lawsuit against Capitol Records and really rejuvenated their career. This is when the album Sunflower came out. By the end of the 1960s, the Beach Boys had sold 65 million records, meaning that they were the most commercially successful American pop band. And the 1970s would really be a different era of nostalgia, but still commercial success for them.
As a touring band, they became the original Nostalgia Act. It was almost like they were the first band to do a reunion tour without actually splitting up in the first place.
In the mid-70s, things changed a little bit for the Beach Boys in America. The planets began to align to rediscover their back catalogue. They had an in-concert album. There was the American Graffiti film, which featured their songs in the soundtrack. And Capitol very smartly put out a couple of compilations of their peak commercially successful material.
Rolling Stone in 1974 named them as Band of the Year. This was really down to their hectic and prolific touring schedule.
Just let me hear some of that rock and roll music. Any old way you choose it.
1976 marked Brian's return as a major force in the group with the release of their next album, 15 Big Ones.
It's gotta be rock and roll music if you want wanna dance with me.
15 Big Ones was Brian Wilson doing old rock and roll songs. But Love You had this kind of frazzled optimism. It was like a sort of drug-damaged optimism, and I just think the nation needed it.
Can get you feeling warmer, and you know what that can lead to.
Love You is the album that he says is his favourite Beach Boys album, and some say it's kind of the first demonstration of early synth pop sound. It's actually become a bit of a cult favourite.
It was heavily reliant on synthesizers and is often seen as a precursor to the new wave movement. And again, shows that Brian, that even when he was coming out of, such a mentally dark place, was foreshadowing the music that was to come, almost a decade later.
If you should ever leave me, the life would still go on, believe me. The world could show nothing to me, so what good would living do me? God only knows what I'd be without you. God only knows what I'd be without you.
God only knows what God only knows.
That's Why God Made the Radio came out in 2012 and went to #3. It was one of their highest charting albums in years.
This meant that it was 49 years of American top 10 albums, which of course is a record. And it shows how important they are to American culture.
God made the radio. That's why God made
The Beach Boys are hugely important to American cultural history. They are the encapsulation of the American dream.
In terms of the surfing ideal, the aesthetic, the sound, that California idea, they were crucial to creating that.
But their influence and their music is much more important than that mere genre. Brian Wilson has influenced a generation of songwriters. He's a pivotal figure in American culture and in pop music.
Close my eyes, she's somehow closer now. Softly smile, I know she must be kind.